Mikhail Gorbachev, the last general secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, came to power in 1985. Gorbachev pushed for serious reform within the Soviet Union, such as perestroika, or restructuring, which suggested a reconfiguration of the political and economic system within the Soviet Union, along more liberal democratic lines, and glasnost, meaning openness or publicity, which suggested transparency within government institutions, and reducing corruption within the Communist Party and the Soviet government. In June of 1988, at the Communist Party of the Soviet Union's party conference, Gorbachev proposed a new executive in the form of a presidential system with legislative elements, known as the Congress of the People's Deputies. In March and April of 1989, the first free elections were held within the Soviet Union since 1917. Gorbachev was elected chairman of the Supreme Soviet, or the head of the state, in May of 1989. On the 15th of March 1990, Gorbachev was elected the first executive president of the Soviet Union. Gennady Yanayev, a known hardliner, became vice president. Contrasting the controversy that arose within the Communist Party over Gorbachev's progressive reforms, Gorbachev was heralded in the West for reducing Cold War tensions. Gorbachev believed that détente was necessary in order to achieve his domestic reforms. Gorbachev began to develop close relationships with leaders of Western nations, such as President Reagan and West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl.
Mr. General Secretary, though my pronunciation may give you difficulty, the maxim is doверяй, no проверяй, trust but verify.
Но значение этого...
На каждой встрече вы это повторяете.
You repeat that at every meeting.
The leaders saw many agreements concerning arms controls and elimination of nuclear weapons. In February of 1988, Gorbachev announced the full withdrawal of Soviet forces from Afghanistan.
They were putting the best face on it. Soviet troops were coming home. They crossed the Amur River over the Friendship Bridge into Soviet Uzbekistan, tanks and armored personnel carriers in parade formation. With this ceremony, the Soviets announced that all but 20,000 troops were out of Afghanistan.
As well, in February of 1988, conflict broke out between Armenia and Azerbaijan in what is known as the Nagorno-Karabakh War. The conflict generally was fought in the mountainous regions of Karabakh and concerned Azerbaijan's attempt to curb the majority ethnic Armenian population's secessionary movement. As well, in 1988, Gorbachev announced the Soviet Union would abandon the Brezhnev Doctrine. This doctrine essentially guaranteed deferential behavior of Soviet satellites, and that no country could compromise the cohesiveness of the Soviet Union by leaving the Warsaw Pact. The abandonment of the Brezhnev Doctrine led to many popular upheavals in Eastern Europe against their pro-Soviet regimes. On the 9th of November, following days of protest, East Germans were allowed to cross through the Berlin Wall into West Berlin.
In 1989, Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev watches the Berlin Wall come down and does nothing to stop it, abdicating 45 years of domination over Eastern Europe without ordering a single Soviet bullet fired.
Gorbachev hadn't assumed that his reforms, such as the abandonment of the Brezhnev Doctrine, would lead to the dissolution of the Warsaw Pact. Instead, he thought the communist parties of Eastern Europe would be reformed and modernized. In December of 1989, a period of violent civil unrest gripped Romania. Starting in the city of Timisoara, it soon spread throughout the country. It eventually ended with the execution of the communist dictator Nicolae Ceausescu.
Ceausescu Nicolae și Ceausescu Elena, la pedeapsa capitală și confiscarea totală a averii pentru săvârșirea infracțiunilor de genocid prevăzut de act 357 alineatul 1 litera C cod penal.
The waning of Soviet hegemony and the increasing democratization in Soviet territory had the effect of reawakening long-suppressed nationalist and anti-Russian sentiments in the Soviet republics. This problem became known to the CPSU as the nationalities problem. Calls for greater independence and protests were held throughout the Soviet republics into the 1990s, and many of them turned violent. Gorbachev published a draft of a new treaty in November of 1990, which envisioned a new union of sovereign Soviet republics in an attempt to save the disintegrating Soviet Union. By April 13th of 1991, 9 of the 15 Soviet republics had agreed to the new union at a government estate known as Novo Orgayovo. The signing of the treaty was set for August 20th of 1991, which would have transformed the Soviet Union into a federation of independent republics with a common president, foreign policy, and military. On the 18th of August 1991, hardliners within the Communist Party of the Soviet Union confined Gorbachev inside his dacha in Crimea in order to prevent his return to Moscow and his ability to sign the treaty. On August 19th of 1991, Red Army personnel carriers rolled into Moscow, headed for the Kremlin. Disgruntled military and security officials were determined not only to remove Gorbachev from power, but with preserving the very existence of the Soviet Union. A statement by the state television was broadcast.
В связи с невозможностью по состоянию здоровья исполнения Горбачевым Михаилом Сергеевичем своих обязанностей президента СССР на основании статьи 127 пункт 7 Конституции СССР вступил в исполнение обязанностей президента СССР с 19 августа 1991 года вице-президент СССР Янаев.
The coup lasted only 3 days before Gorbachev returned to power. However, it had the effect of weakening Gorbachev's ability to assert his authority over the leaders of the Soviet republics who wanted independence.
Я вижу свой долг, до конца буду делать, пока это в моих силах, для того, чтобы сдержать, всячески воспрепятствовать, более того, избавиться, изгнать из КПСС реакционные силы. Мы должны все сделать для того, чтобы реформировалась партия и стала живой силой перестройки.
Also, during the 3 days of the coup, the world became acquainted with the newly elected president of the Russian Republic, Boris Yeltsin, who became the embodiment of the independence movement.
Они дискредитируют Союз перед всем миром, подрывая наш престиж в мировом сообществе, возвращают нас к эпохе холодной войны и изоляции Советского Союза от мирового сообщества. Все это заставляет нас объявить незаконным пришедший к власти так называемый комитет.
A president gets the cheers. Boris Yeltsin, president of Russia, thanked by Mikhail Gorbachev for his courage, appearing before tens of thousands of supporters at the Russian parliament.
By September of 1991, Gorbachev recognized the independence of the 3 Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. On December the 8th of 1991, Yeltsin met with the leaders of Ukraine and Belarus and signed the Belovezia Accords, which would abolish the Soviet Union with the intention of creating a new confederation of post-Soviet states, known as the Commonwealth of Independent States. The alliance was open to all republics of the former Soviet Union and to any other nation with similar interests. The Commonwealth Charter stated that all member states are sovereign and independent. On the 21st of December 1991, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Moldova, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan signed the Alma-Ata Accords, joining the Commonwealth. Georgia joined the Commonwealth 2 years later on December of 1993. The Baltic states chose not to join. Therefore, 12 of the 15 former Soviet republics joined the Commonwealth of Independent States. The Alma-Ata Protocol provided that the Russian Federation would assume the Soviet Union's UN membership and its permanent seat on the UN Security Council. In a televised speech on Christmas night of 1991, Gorbachev officially announced his resignation and the end of the USSR.
Я покидаю свой пост с тревогой. но и с надеждой, с верой в вас, в вашу мудрость и силу духа. Мы наследники великой цивилизации, и сейчас от всех и каждого зависит, чтобы она возродилась к новой, современной и достойной жизни.
While new problems emerged, tonight in Red Square, the symbol of the old administration was removed. The red flag was lowered from the Kremlin, replaced by the Russian banner, at the very moment Mikhail Gorbachev officially became the 8th and last leader of the Soviet Union.
Most leaders in the West had a similar question in the back of their mind. Now that both the Cold War and the Soviet Union ceased, how should the international system reconstitute itself? Unlike other fallen empires, and though economically weak, Russia still had the military capability to destroy its former adversary, the United States. At this juncture, many in the West were wary as to how the former Soviet republics would transition away from communism and authoritarianism, fearing ethnic violence would ensue.